Gallery. It's nice to see you. I'd like to acknowledge that we're on the territory of the Sechelt First Nation. And we have agenda in front of us. Are there any changes, additions, deletions? Director Beamish.
Chair, I'd appreciate the opportunity under new business to discuss preparation for this coming summer and the fire season. It's certainly a topical issue right now. We are very focused on water and water issues, but I think we should also have a focus on fire and providing information to homeowners on preparedness. We could discuss that under new business.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anything else? So I'd look for a motion to adopt the agenda as presented with the small amendment. First, moved and seconded. All in favor? Thank you. So first, a motion to receive all the reports. Moved and seconded. All in favor of receipt? Thank you. So, Annex A. This is Sechelt Public Library Service Establishment. And I'm going to turn over to our, General Manager of, Corporate Services Chief Financial Officer, Tina Perreault.
Thank you, Chair. So the Sechelt Public Library currently receives its local share of funding from the District of Sechelt, the Sechelt Indian Government District, and electoral areas A, B, and D of the Sunshine Coast Regional District. In 2014, the Sechelt Library and local government partners entered into a 5-year funding agreement, which expired at the end of 2018. A new agreement was not completed. However, the funders provided a significant baseline increase as well as contribution for special projects towards the library for their 2019 budget request. As part of the budget deliberations, staff were asked to bring the legislative, funding, and internal resource implication to establishing a regional district service for the Sechelt Public Library. In order for a regional district service to be established, the proposed bylaw needs to first describe the purpose of the service, for example, providing funding to the Sechelt Public Library. It must define the service boundaries, so which specific properties would be within the service. It must identify the participants, so which electoral areas or municipalities would be contributing in the service. The method of cost recovery, so this could either be through property tax, parcel taxes, fees, and other charges. It must also contain the maximum amount that the regional district may requisition, and the method of apportioning cost amongst the participants. Staff have provided 3 preliminary options for considerations. First, to modify the existing Half Moon Bay Library Service, Bylaw 1046. The other option is to create a completely new service. Third is to continue to fund the Sechelt Public Library through a service agreement. Some funding apportionment analysis was also provided, and staff seek more direction if other options are to be considered. Based on the statutory requirement of public consultation, member municipal consent, and legislative steps with the Inspector of Municipalities and BC Assessment, it would be unlikely that a modified or new regional district Sechelt Library Service would be established in time for the 2020 tax year. However, it probably would be likely for 2021. If a new service bylaw was not successful, a new long-term agreement is recommended. Staff have also included background documents and historical reference and are available to answer any questions the committee may have. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions from the board? All right. How would you like to move this forward? Director Ties.
I would like to ask staff what their recommendation might be, and yeah, that's kind of my thought.
Staff? Do you want to comment?
I think there's a lot of pros and cons to each alternative. We did try to provide a little bit of what those would be to the various options. This is not, of course, the exhaustive options to fund the library. There's also some pros and cons to the existing library services because, of course, we already have services established for each of the specific rural areas. So, of course, in establishing a new service or modifying a new service, we'd have to contemplate how we would continue to, fund the library rooms, for instance, and what is the implication to those particular community groups in the long term too. So there's lots of other alternatives that are probably more grand in nature that other communities have explored. That hasn't been any direction that the staff have received at this particular time. So we don't have any particular recommendation, but essentially a lot of the same things that a service would dictate is currently what a service agreement would also dictate. So, whether or not there's any benefits to creating a library service, really I think the crux of the matter is determining an apportionment method, continuity of funding for the library, and funding assurity. And I think that's some of the items that we're trying to address here.
Director Tice?
Thanks for that. I'm kind of tempted to go with a renewal of the service agreement because that certainly, I think, reduces the amount of process that needs to be involved. The big dilemma that I have with being from Roberts Creek is that I'm sort of tied into two service agreements, and they're both dependent on one another in the vision of Roberts Creek. So I really don't know how easy it is for me to figure it out, how to do a 50-50 split when I'm going between two different service agreements. But I guess that's something that we need to kind of reconcile in one way or another. Right now, I can't see a solution to that one.
I just look to staff for clarification. Does the service agreement that he has with the two different libraries say that it needs to be 50-50? Or is that an assumption on his part at this point?
It's based on the recommendation provided.
But it's not set out in the bylaw that's been established. Okay. Director Pratt.
Thank you. I would agree that we need to continue or renew a service agreement, but I think that there's a lot more conversation that still needs to happen around looking at actually implementing a service. So I would be prepared to enter a motion that the board supports staff to enter into or negotiate a 5-year service agreement. I have a couple of motions here on this. So I'm going to start with that staff enter into a negotiation for a new 5-year service agreement with the Sechelt Library.
Is there a seconder for that motion? Second. Any discussion? Director McMahon. Sorry. This morning.
Yeah, I think that's the sensible way to go because, for one thing, it will hopefully be applicable to next year's budget. And I do think that there is a larger conversation that should be had about methods to fund the library. It's unfortunate that a bylaw wasn't set up at the time, back in the day. But now we've got this sort of overlapping situation, and I think all the various players need to come to the table and come up with a solution.
I'm going to speak to this. I look at the recommendations that are on page 1, and I'd also like to see these move forward because I agree it is a bigger conversation. One of the things that we're not aware of at this table is what are the impacts on the library funding of the different models. So not just our funding, but funding that they receive from the province, for example. Mm-hmm. So if they become a regional service, how does that impact their funding from the province? If it becomes a municipal service, how does that impact their funding from the province? So while I think the 5-year funding agreement needs to get underway, Along with that, we also have to have them explore those other options so that they're aware as they move forward, and everybody's aware of what the impacts are of the agreement that we, in the end, put together. Director Pratt.
Thank you. And I think that's definitely the same thought process I'm having, just separating it into little pieces, because I think the first thing is if we enter into a 5-year funding agreement, as we had in 2014, it at least it provides a bit of a buffer and some certainty to the library, and it gives us a buffer to have some time to and have that proper consultation process with the other governments, as well as with the library and the province as well, and make sure that we're following and looking at all the options.
All right, any other comments on the motion on the floor? So I'll call for a vote. All those in favor? And you two don't vote on this, right? Perfect. All right. Okay, and did you have additional motions?
I do. First off, though, I would like to move the other two staff recommendations on page 1, and then I have another motion that I'd like to add in.
Okay,
after.
I'll second that recommendation.
Thank you.
Any comments on that? All those in favor? Thank you. And Director Pratt.
Okay, thank you. So my second motion is that staff further investigate implementing a service with the District of Sechelt and SIGD, including cost sharing and taxation and options, and report back to the board. A timeline, I was thinking, I don't know if Q4 2019 or Q1 2020 is appropriate. I'd look to staff on the timeline, but
Could you explain your motion?
that staff further investigate implementing a service. So
okay.
yeah,
Okay.
service.
Sorry, thank you.
And I had said District of Sechelt and SIGD, but there's also the provincial level as well. So, and also the Sechelt Library Board. Sorry, I didn't have that written down here, including to look at cost sharing and taxation. Does that make sense?
Yes?
Okay.
And it's seconded? Any discussion? Director McMahon.
I don't believe the province is involved in this. I mean, there is a service for the Gibsons Library. There has been a bylaw since 1996, and the province has nothing to do with it.
My understanding of this is not the province involved in the service, but the province actually funds the library through their funding arrangement, and the setup that we have actually impacts how that's determined and how much they actually get. I do know that, so, I mean, where this comes from is when the library actually paid rent to the District of Sechelt prior to the last funding agreement. What we found was because they paid rent, it actually decreased the funding they received from the province. So there are implications. I think we're just looking at what are the implications to the province, and maybe that's the wording that needs to be in the motion. Implications, yeah. So investigate the service agreement with the various and the impacts on the provincial funding model. Is that what you're looking at, or more than that?
We're editing on the fly.
Yes.
Or amending on the fly.
Should I see what our motion says?
Thank you, Chair Seegers. So as what I have is recommended that staff investigate implementing a service with the SCRD, District of Sechelt, SIGD, and the Sechelt Public Library Board, and consider if there are implications to the provincial funding model, and that the report consider cost sharing and options and be reported back in Q4 of 2019.
Director McMahon.
I know it's already pretty long, but did you want to consider the implications on the reading rooms?
Yeah, I would second that amendment, actually.
Okay, so I'll second the motion, and then Director McMahon is making an amendment, which Director Pratt is seconding.
Yes.
Okay. Director Lee.
I was trying to figure out why we would need a new service, if we're going to have a 5-year agreement. I don't know what the difference would be, because by the time we get the agreement all agreed on, I think we'll probably want to understand the whole picture anyways. So I don't know what establishing a service would do to help us with our thought process.
Okay. Director Pratt, did you want to address that?
I think what the main, we saw it this year where we came to the end of 2018 and the library board, or the library didn't have, they ended the agreement and there was nothing in the works to get the new agreement started. And so there was a gap, and there's still, technically there's no new agreement, even though we're still providing funding. This provides certainty. If we go forward and a service, the decision is to go forward with a service, even within that 5-year window, it might take, like when we look at the timeline for establishing a service, it's going to take quite some time to get through that. This would provide certainty for the library in that time, and if we decide to implement the service within that 5-year agreement, then that it's doable. We can come to that. We can negotiate that through. But it provides that certainty to all the parties involved.
The other piece I'd like to bring in there, and this actually affects you in your area, is your reading room. Because, as we know, their funding is going to be running out in the next while at this point. So what's the impact of all of this on your reading room? And I think that's a really good amendment that's been put in here, so that all of it will be looked at. And then we may choose not to go ahead with the service, but at least we've got the background, and it's not going to be a question that comes up again. Did you want to comment?
I was thinking total cost to to my taxpayers in Area A, and the reading room is funded by volunteers, and once we enter into a service, we're very liable to start paying instead of volunteers, which drives the cost up for everybody. And I think both reading rooms are similar, run by volunteers. And I think that's an awful good way of doing it. You get a lot of bang for your dollar. You can spend more money on books and essential services that way. I guess I don't want to discourage them. They're doing great, and they run it themselves, and they don't need us. It just happens. It's a pretty flexible way of doing things. So that's what I'm having a thought process on it. And as well, my assumption here is that if we decide to put more money into the reading rooms, I think the those existing bylaws would allow us to fund the reading rooms already. Do I have that right?
And staff? They're saying yes.
Yeah.
Okay, Director McMahon.
Technically speaking, the reading rooms are not libraries, and they cannot become libraries under the provincial law. So they really actually shouldn't be funded through the library function. But, this is just something that has arisen. They need to be funded somehow. They could be, the Gumboot Tea Society and Book Club. Yeah, you could call it anything, but they actually aren't public libraries. But they're worthy, and they're very important to the community.
Director Pratt.
Question for staff on the timeline of reporting back. Is Q4 2019 doable, or would you prefer would a longer timeline be better with this, because it's quite complicated?
And staff?
Well, I think that timeline's fair. I mean, this report and the information has already been forwarded to colleagues, so of course now it will formally be presented to the various councils. So I think once we receive more information and feedback from the various councils, then we can see what the next steps are. So we may be even reporting back earlier, but I think those timelines are fair.
All right, any other comments? So we'll vote first on the amendment. That's to add the reading room piece in. All those in favor of the amendment? All right, so then the motion as amended. And do we need that repeated, or are you all clear on what we're voting on? Good? Okay, so all those in favor? Thank you very much. So we'll move on to Annex B, page 58. And Sherry, are you speaking to this? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. The board has requested that resolutions on 3 topics be prepared for submission to the Union of BC Municipalities for consideration at the September 2019 convention. Draft resolutions on the topics of funding for alternative transportation infrastructure, authority for tree cutting in regional districts, and BC ferry service improvements have been prepared and are proposed for the committee's consideration in this report.
Thank you. And directors. There are 3. Yes, Director Ties.
So for the first one, I think it's the first one, is it? Page 60. Whereas the BC government has committed itself to the Paris Accord, Director Hills actually pointed out that it's the federal government that committed itself to the Paris Accord. And the BC government has only committed itself to an 80% reduction from 2007 levels by 2050. So I'd like to amend that motion to say, whereas the federal government has committed itself to the Paris Accord to limit climate warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius, and the provincial government has committed itself to reduce greenhouse gas emissions to 80% below 2007 levels by 2050, comma, and then the rest is the same. And has committed to an active transportation strategy.
Okay, could you repeat that piece that you've added in? So you've changed the BC government to federal government, whereas the federal government has committed itself to the Paris Accord to limit climate warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius, and the provincial government has
committed itself to reduce greenhouse gas emissions to 80% below 2007 levels by 2050.
Okay, we're going to have you repeat that once more so that Tara can get that down.
All right. Where do you need me?
I have, and the BC government has committed itself to reduce greenhouse gas emissions
to 80% below 2007 levels by 2050.
Okay.
It's a lot of numbers, I know. And has committed to an active transportation strategy, and then it's all the same.
Okay, is there somebody who'd like to second that motion? There was no motion on the floor, so we're not amending anything. So that's a motion that's put forward. Director McMahon, second. Any comments? Okay, all those in favor of that resolution as presented. Thank you. Second one is on page 61. Okay, Director McMahon.
I have an additional motion, so at the end. Okay, good, thanks.
I have it open in my email. Director Ties.
So for the second one, the only question I have is that in the third paragraph it says that the Union of BC Municipalities urged the provincial government to provide regional districts broader authority over tree cutting that is equal to the regulatory power of municipalities for tree protection, particularly in unincorporated rural areas that are more densely populated. And I'm just wondering if we can change the wording here to say only in densely populated areas, just so that it might get some more traction from the government. Because if we ask for, I just want to make sure that the BC government knows that we only want it in more densely populated areas and that we don't want the tree cutting authority throughout the whole region. So I just wonder if we can make that wording a little bit stronger.
And I'd like to just move this around a little bit too. The way I read this is provide regional districts broader authority over tree cutting that is equal to the regulatory power of municipalities for tree protection, particularly in unincorporated rural areas that are more densely populated. Well, municipalities have it all over the place, not just in, right? So you're actually talking about, so what I'd have it read is, therefore be it resolved, the Union of BC Municipalities urge the provincial government to provide regional districts broader authority over tree cutting, particularly in, or only in unincorporated, is that what you wanted to say? But only in in unincorporated rural areas that are more densely populated, that is equal to the regulatory power of municipalities for tree protection.
That works.
Do you want only in unincorporated rural areas and more densely populated? What would you like it to say there?
Yeah, I think that would probably get a little bit more traction.
Or
I don't know
just
if you want to
in
keep it as
unincorporated?
general as it is right now.
Or do you just want to say in, instead of particularly, just say in unincorporated rural areas that are more densely populated?
Yeah.
Director
Maybe
Pratt.
take the particularly out.
I'm fine leaving the densely populated or more densely populated out, and I'll tell you why I have that. There's some instances where there may be danger trees, danger branches that might be over a roadway that would typically fall under Capilano, but it's because we have no jurisdiction over cutting trees, and we have no mandate to cut trees. And I had a call from a constituent when we had that last windstorm, and he had a branch fall down right in front of him on Red Roofs Road, and it's a danger area, and it'll get got to eventually. There's another one hanging down, but it just barely missed him. So there's no jurisdiction we have over going and cutting them because we're just not able to. We have to wait for Capilano to get to it when they have time. And it's hanging over top of, it's on Red Roofs Road, hanging over top of a walkway, and there's nothing we can do about it.
So I'm going to play devil's advocate here. I understand the issue with our service provider having a large area to cover. But by actually taking on the authority for that, we also take on the liability if something happens. So, Director McMahon.
Since we're all wordsmithing here, I'm going to suggest that we just drop the last line and end it at equal to the regulatory power of municipalities for tree protection. And because, as you pointed out, Sechelt has areas where you don't go in and cut trees. So,
Director Todd.
I'm just afraid that if we lose that last line, that the province is just going to say, hell no, because they don't want the regional districts to be able to have tree cutting powers over crown land and such things, and where, you've got BC forest licenses and all that kind of stuff. But maybe staff has something to say about that.
And staff.
Thank you. So even if the regional district was granted authority to regulate tree cutting, it wouldn't apply to Crown land. It would not.
So where would you like to go with this one? Director, God, I just can't get names today. Director Lee.
Some regional areas probably don't want to regulate tree cutting, so we have to have an opt-in and an opt-out. Does municipalities have that now? Is that a function they can take on or not to regulate their trees within their area?
Yes.
So it's an opt-in rather than...
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
Director Beamish.
say we are looking at broadening our regulatory responsibility in Gibson's now. We do, within our public lands, have prohibitions and restrictions on tree cutting, tree removal, and for development purposes, and on rights of way, and this sorts of things, and protection of certain trees. We dealt with a request last Tuesday night from a constituent wanting us to broaden that and go onto private lands and regulate trees. And it's a challenging process because, first of all, you have to have the staff to be able to do that. You have to actually inventory your trees, and then you have to monitor, probably by complaint from neighbor to neighbor, as to who's cutting down a tree or whatever. But the challenge also becomes is when you start moving that direction, you start seeing trees disappear before you actually get the bylaw in place. Because people say, I better deal with this now because next month I won't be able to cut this tree down. So there's some things that to consider. We're going to go down that path and see what we can do. And see what we reasonably, the urban forests of Vancouver and Surrey, and they've moved to protect them. They have a huge staff that can actually monitor those, measure them, and do all that sort of thing. Whereas we have one bylaw officer working Monday to Friday, and it was prompted by a complaint from somebody where somebody come onto their private property and cut a tree down to improve a view. That's not going to protect the trees if people do that. That's vandalism, theft, and a whole bunch of other things. So but we'll just have to see. But we are looking at that as well from a municipal perspective.
And in Sechelt, actually yesterday, our committee, the whole meeting, staff brought forward a new tree cutting bylaw. Our old one, it was old and didn't have any teeth in it. So this one actually does do what you're indicating. It looks at regulating on private property. It's been brought forward for discussion at this point, so was presented. It's going out to the public for feedback because we have some of those similar concerns. How do we monitor it? What is the cost to residents if everybody who's looking to cut down a tree has to come back with a tree plan, right? So we don't know. So we've kind of gone to that other end, and we're going to see where it might end up somewhere in the middle once we're done. So keep your eyes out, and you can read it. It's fascinating reading. Director McMahon.
I'm going to move the resolution as it stands. As much fun as this discussion is.
Is there a seconder for that? Second? Any other discussion? All those in favor? Thank you. And the third one in here is bottom of page 60. Sorry, staff?
Thank you. Just for clarity, I want to understand if it was moved as it was presented in the report or
as presented in the report.
Okay, thank you.
So next one is bottom of page 61 and top of 62. This is regarding BC Ferries. Anybody like to speak to this one or move this one? Director Hills.
In general terms, is it appropriate? There's some discussion about this being a coastal issue, whether it should go to UBCM. That's the first part. And I guess I'm looking at that, the phrasing unsatisfactory on-time performance. It doesn't seem to be kind of collaborative language that we're trying to work with ferries and comparing BC Ferries performance versus Washington State. Washington State's like 93, 94. BC Ferries is like 89%, and it depends on the time of year. So if it was to go through, I would just look at some language that's a little bit more friendly, I guess, to say that we're trying to work with them rather than saying, it seems kind of accusatory and blaming that we're saying it's unsatisfactory, and who's to say it's unsatisfactory? So it's just a little bit of a word there.
I think that follows on the presentation that we had from Mark Collins at AVICC, where he indicated that when he goes to ferry conferences, and others are talking about their on-time performance and how difficult it is to keep their 14 sailings on time in a day. And he talks about 270 or something like that in a day. That, they really back off quickly because it's quite a feat to do what they do at BC Ferries. So how would you rather see this worded? Director Pratt?
I think if we actually just take out the phrase, so where it says, whereas ferry service levels, and then actually take out and unsatisfactory on-time performance, if you take that out, the rest of everything still reads the same, but it's taking out that negative piece that Director Hiltz had issue with. So, but I think it's still, if you read through the rest of the motion, if just taking out that phrase, everything else stays the same.
Yeah, that works. Are you happy with that, Director Hiltz? All right. Director Lee.
I was wondering if this is actually necessary, because they already said they're going to give us another ferry, and we're just actually waiting for it to come. I don't know what kind of magic passing a resolution like this could do. It takes a while to get a ferry.
Okay, we had Director McMahon first, and then Director Pratt.
In fact, I agree with Director Lee. I think BC Ferries has improved its collaboration with coastal communities by leaps and bounds over what it used to be. And, all the resolutions in the world can't fix the issues that they have currently with the Horseshoe Bay ferry terminal. I would like to see them do more with foot passengers and alternative transportation.
Director Pratt.
Thank you. So, well, BC Ferries has it in their capital plan for a second ferry. It hasn't been approved by the government, by the province yet. So this is actually not smacking BC Ferries. This is advocating to the province for more ferry service, because it's that service agreement is that piece. We need that memorandum, that service agreement. We need that to be looked at. We need that to be increased in order, because BC Ferries is providing based on their service agreement, and they're actually going above and beyond on our route. And if we want more to happen, around active transportation, passenger service, then more needs to be done with the province around the service agreement.
So if I read this last piece, it doesn't actually say anything about funding or service agreement. It talks about developing a strategy. How would you like to address that? Who'd like to speak to that? Director Pratt?
We definitely need to have, I can't think of the wording right off the top of my head, but we do need to have something in there about increasing the service agreement, especially on our route, because if we want to look at having passenger service provided by BC Ferries, if we want to definitely see that second ferry, we need to advocate more to the province and make sure that they increase that service agreement with BC Ferries. But it's a provincial issue. It's not a BC Ferries issue.
Director McMahon, did you want to speak, or can I go to Director Beamish?
I was just going to say that given that we have until June 30th, I think we could take this one back to the drawing table.
Director Beamish?
Yeah, I would like to actually suggest two resolutions. The first one being on the on-time issue and the new ferry service and things like that. The second one being the alternate means of transportation linked to the climate change goals. The issue there being that by increasing foot passengers, by providing foot passenger service, not just to the Sunshine Coast, but there are other areas like Nanaimo, we are reducing the number of vehicles going into the lower mainland and affording those people opportunities for direct service and better service, and linking to meeting the climate change goals of both BC Ferries and the province and our communities by doing that. So I think that could be the tag on of the including the dedicated foot passengers, it seems to be a tag on to this resolution, and it should almost be a separate resolution, which is one that I was actually going to bring forward to our council, but I would certainly support it coming from the regional district and through our council to the regional district.
So could I ask that you make a motion that this be referred back to staff and be split into two to address the different issues? And they've been taking notes over there, so I think they've got the information. Is there anything further you need, staff? Okay.
Yeah. And just further to that, as you recall at the ABICC, when we did talk to Mr. Collins, he did say that they have no mandate for a foot passenger service. So it has to be a new mandate as opposed to the current mandate they have for ferry service. So that give the province giving them a new mandate for foot passenger.
Okay. So are you referring this back to staff? Director Beamish?
Sorry?
Are you referring this back to staff then?
I'm happy to refer it back to staff,
Okay.
and it'll save my staff having to do it.
Is there a seconder for that? Second? Any other comments? All those in favor? Thank you. So those were the recommendations in here, and then Director McMahon brought forward another one. Would you like to speak to that? And did you email that to staff?
I did, and there's some
Tara has a copy.
written
Yes.
copies, which is very helpful. I'm going to read it out just because I think it's pretty. And a special thank you to Manny Machado at the Town of Gibsons for helping draft this. Whereas the province of BC is undertaking a coast forest sector revitalization initiative to rebuild solid wood and associated industries, improve harvest performance, maintain a credible auction system, foster stronger relationships between BC timber sales licensees and First Nations, and restore public confidence through amendments to the Forest and Range Practices Act. And whereas forests offer provisioning services such as timber, food and fuels, regulating services such as carbon sequestration that keep our planet habitable, cultural services such as recreation, core government services including drinking water storage and filtration, stormwater management and flood control, and many other ecological processes that are vital to human life, yet primarily taken for granted and not accounted for. And whereas many jurisdictions are assigning economic value to ecosystem services in forests and many other natural areas to support sustainable development, cost-effective and reliable service delivery, and the long-term preservation of a healthy biodiverse ecosystem, therefore be it resolved that the province of BC undertake natural capital valuations in all aspects of its forests and land resources management, starting with the Coast Forest Sector Revitalization Initiative, and demonstrably use these values in all related decision-making and asset management. It's a bit long, but it covers the ground,
All right.
and I'd like to make that as a motion.
Is there a seconder? Director Ties. And does anybody like to speak to it? Or is it self-explanatory? Director Hiltz?
I'm looking at the human life one. It's really a human-centric. I'm wondering if you want to even maybe drop out the vital to human life to just vital to like planetary life, because you're really talking ecosystems, like take it away from the humans and give it back to nature a little bit, I think. So I'm wondering if you'd be interested in doing something like that.
You okay with that?
So strike human, or do you want to?
Vital to life? Yeah, primary.
Okay.
Yes. Okay. So vital to life. Okay.
So a motion to remove human?
Okay, all in favor of the amendment? Thank you. Okay. Any other comments on the motion as amended? For the resolution as amended? All those in favor? Thank you. Any others at this point? Director Beamish.
I don't know if this truly fits into an ABICC resolution yet, because it actually relates to the Government of Canada, but after our after our interagency meeting, I noted the resolutions that would be bringing forth by the Government of Canada on climate change. And I know that in terms of our discussions, I've actually proposed a resolution for our council. Will come up in the next council agenda, and basically says that our council supports the decision by the Government of Canada to declare a national climate emergency, and requests that the Government of Canada allocate funding to municipalities to enable them to respond to climate change impacts on their communities and to meet or exceed the carbon reduction goals adopted in the Paris Accord. Now that's basically saying that Government of Canada, yes, we accept that you're declaring a climate emergency. Now follow through and do something about it, and provide the means to local governments to do that. I don't know if that would fit in with a UBCM resolution to say that because it's directed more at the province of BC, unless it was changed to recognize that the Canada has declared an emergency, and the BC, in concert with the Government of Canada, provide the resources to local governments to deal with that emergency, and that could be a way of dealing with that. So I don't know how the board feels about that.
Any comments on that? Director McMahon?
Given the importance of the issue, I think we might as well just go for it.
And did you have suggested wording, given the focus and the fact that we're taking it to UBCM? Staff?
Thank you. I was just, if the resolution is already going to Gibson's council, then they can submit it to UBCM and the board can support it in other ways. I'm not sure whether we need to duplicate it.
Yeah, we could follow through with that at Gibson's table. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Director Lee.
I was wondering if we could put some words in it around the fact that we need to get timely decisions from them as well if it's truly an emergency.
Yeah.
It's not just money. We need them to make decisions in a timely manner if we're going to respond.
Yeah. Director Pratt.
And I would agree, the timeliness issue, because it doesn't escape the fact that there's also an election this fall, so I want to make sure this isn't just election posturing.
Yeah.
So I'm looking forward to Gibson's bringing it up and bringing it through UBCM, because it'll be weeks before the federal election, so the timeliness will be really interesting to see what happens there.
Yeah. And we can all speak to it then.
And we can all speak to it there, and that's great.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Any other comments?
Thank you.
Okay. So we're moving on to Annex C, page 63. And we'll turn this over to Angie Legault. Thank you, Sherry.
Thank you, Chair Seegers. This is a bit of a housekeeping matter to seek approval to execute renewals of co-location agreements for some 911 radio equipment that is located at ECOM and is essential for our fire dispatch services.
Any comments, questions? Director Hills?
There really is no alternative to this method, right? ECOM is the only really player that we can deal with.
At this time, this is our best option.
Okay, so would someone like to make the recommendations? Director Pratt and Director McMahon second. Any other comments? Director Beamish?
Yeah, I'm actually pleased to see those towers are located off the coast, because if we had a true emergency in a fire, that they wouldn't be damaged over there, so I appreciate that.
Thank you. All those in favor? Thank you. So Annex D. And Mr. Allen is going to speak to this one. This is support for application to Housing Needs Assessment Program.
Yes, thank you, Chair Seegers. Last month we received notification from the province that funding is available for housing needs assessments. There was a recent amendment to the Local Government Act which requires that local governments, municipalities, regional districts, including the Sechelt Nation, commence housing needs assessments. And we have 3 years to complete our next assessment. And the province has announced funding. And there are 2 funding intakes, one for the end of this month, coming up very quickly, as well as one for later in the year in November. Initial plans from SCRD were to consider providing background, assembling a package, and making recommendation for November intake. However, as noted on the agenda, correspondence has been received from Town of Gibson's suggesting taking a lead on immediate grant intake for this month. And we have received correspondence and drafted a potential resolution for committee to consider. Thank you.
Thank you. And just for the board's information, District of Sechelt has passed a recommendation to be part of this as well. So that's already been passed and forwarded on. Director Lee.
So the town of Gibson's is going to take on the task of doing a needs assessment for all of our districts?
It would look at the whole coast.
Oh, cool.
Right. So they would take the lead in working with a consultant, because the funds that come from this would actually pay for a consultant to do the work. Staff would be involved, but yes, Director Hills.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. It's just a check-in on page 66 in terms of where staff talked to Town of Gibson's and the District of Sechelt, and that they didn't overlook the Islands Trust, even though I'm sure that they did. Islands Trust had it completed in 2018, so that's why they weren't included.
Staff?
Thank you, Chair Seegers. There was specific notation, I believe, in the funding that the Islands Trust was notably to be considered as separate. And there are tables within the information as to who is eligible for funding, and the Islands Trust is separate from mainland SCRD. Thank you.
Okay, so what's the will of the board? Director McMahon?
Oh, I would move the resolution as presented.
Thank you. Is there a seconder? Second? Any other comments, questions? All those in favor? Thank you. Thank you, staff.
Clarification, does this need to go to the board before it has the
Yes.
authority to go to our council? Because could it go to the board today?
It's
Sorry.
actually
Yeah,
as part of the
there. I'm sorry, I see it there.
recommendation.
Yeah,
Right there.
yeah,
Thanks.
I just saw myself. Yeah, I did see that somewhere. Okay, good, because we are ready to move on. Thank you.
Thank you. And Annex E, this is the procurement policy framework. And I'll turn to staff.
Hi. Sorry. The purchasing policy was adopted in June 9th, 2011, and has not been updated since that time. Since the creation of that current policy, there have been advancements in public procurement practices, some of which those changes are a result of case law, new trade agreements or amendments to existing trade agreements, as well as supporting agencies like the Auditor General of Local Government. As such, staff are recommending that the new policy be drafted to reflect the changing public procurement environment and strengthening vendor and community relations. The first 5 elements covered in the report are items that have been identified as requirements in creating a comprehensive policy that clearly defines authority, responsibility, and established guidelines for the organization to follow when carrying out their responsibilities. Items for discussion today may include elements for the threshold amounts. The recommended presented in the staff report are based on looking at averages of other regional districts, municipalities, and the province. Item 6, where the board is considering public reporting requirements, it's important to understand the balance between the confidentiality duties to the vendor communities and supporting public transparency. Also, for further discussion is under other consideration is the staff report. A procurement policy may also provide guidance for the use of special public procurement programs such as sustainable social procurement to help the SCRD strengthen their strategic plan and support that. The benefits will be added to certain procurement process that can lead to added community benefits, and the committee would want to consider to be included in the policy. Staff will include today's discussions and prepare a draft procurement policy to the CAS committee meeting in July for review and further input from the committee.
Thank you. So one of the questions that we've been asked is, what about threshold amounts? Yes, so that's on page, sorry, get to that, on page 72. Director McMahon?
The threshold amounts look pretty reasonable to me. I like that it appears that between $10,000 and $50,000, we have the option to either do an invitational process or a formal competitive process, whichever seems more appropriate under the circumstances. And I think, it's good to have that flexibility.
Okay, any other comments? Director Pratt?
I would concur with Director McMahon. The thresholds look great to me, and most of my comments are around the social procurement piece, so if it's okay if I just head into that. I'm a huge proponent of social procurement because we are a small community, and I've seen in my previous role what federal, international, and provincial trade agreements can do to small local business when they're implemented on a larger scale. And I'll use the example of the school bus contracts as being a really good example of a contract that was awarded to an off-coast company because of the necessity to protect the taxpayer money and protect the trade agreements. And what happened was we lost two small local companies that had been they'd been in operation for years, but we were bound by the larger government agreements. So I would really like to see a social procurement policy within our policy. I know AVICC has done a lot of work. I sat as a trustee, as an advisor on that committee when they were putting together the Social Benefits Hub, and they've done some great work. There's some amazing things that are already going on in the region, and I'd really like to see a social procurement piece in there as well.
Thank you. Director Hiltz and then Beamish.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, in general, I'm really supportive, particularly since the Auditor General came out in 2012, so this is really due for an update. And in terms of the social procurement, yeah, I'm in favor of that. And so one of the questions is the regional district part of that Coastal Communities Social Procurement Initiative? I see the town of Gibson's is, but I'm not sure if the SCRD is part of that initiative as a member.
Thank you. Staff? Do you know if we are or not?
Hi, at this time, I believe we are not part of the procurement group that was created.
Director Hills? Follow.
Further along, I might make a motion that the SCRD does join that as a member. It's like about a $300 annual membership, I think. So as something to come up as we move along through this piece.
Director Beeman.
Yes, timely. I actually raised this on Tuesday night at our council meeting relative to a RFP award, and that is the whole issue of living wage. We live in the coastal area here. We were concerned about affordability of housing. We're concerned about a number of social issues. I know that the town of Gibson's, and I assume probably both our municipalities and the regional district, are living wage employers, being that there's probably nobody on our staffs that are earning less than $19.50 an hour, which is the approximate living wage for this area. And I'm wondering if there's a way that we could incorporate that into our bids, because otherwise, what are we doing if we're not encouraging employers to pay a living wage? And if we have the ability to do that as a living wage employer, we should be kind of encouraging that. Now, there may be exceptions to that type of policy for student type wages or beginner, but it should be either within the contract that they require a living wage, or have a living wage policy that within their organization that we can see. Something I've struggled with, and I just don't like to see us kind of fighting at both ends. Trying to find people housing and also letting large contracts out that allows employers to pay people less than the living wage in the community. So, my thoughts.
Did staff have any comments on that piece? the living wage piece and how that fits in here?
Hi, so the living wage can kind of fit under the employee training and diversity and equity stages that were presented in the briefing note, or so you guys don't call them briefing notes here, in the staff report. But there would be, I think, a little bit more research to do about the impacts that would cause to some of our local vendor communities, because the resources are small here. So I would say that we would need to take that back and do a bit more analysis around that.
Okay, so Director Beamish, would you like to request that staff look at that and come back?
Yeah, I would appreciate if that could be looked at in the context. And again, it could be in the context of requiring a living wage or having a living wage policy within the organization where they are moving towards a living wage, just something that we can address in terms of the evaluation of criteria when we put out a proposal.
I'll second that. Any other comments on that piece? So, I mean, I'd like to bring this up at our council as well, and if we're looking at it here, it can inform, right? Any other questions, comments? Director McMahon?
I am very much in favor of the environmental responsibility aspect
Sorry,
of this.
can we just stay on this one first?
On
and
this
then,
one,
yeah,
I
this one?
beg your pardon.
Okay, and then we'll come to that one. Director Ties, did you want to speak on the living wage piece? Okay, so all those in favor of the living wage being looked at by staff. Thank you. Okay, Director McMahon, next.
Environmental stuff, great. And it fits in with our strategic plan, which is still in process, but we have to be a lot more serious about our environmental sustainability here.
Director Ties?
Yeah, on that note, I'd like to see if that within the procurement mechanisms that we look at lifetime greenhouse gas emissions of things that we would be procuring, and then that there's always sort of, if we have several options to choose from, that greenhouse gas emissions are part of the accounting as to why we would make that decision. So that not only will we look at the lifetime costs, but also the lifetime greenhouse gas emissions of whatever we're going to procure in the future.
Okay, any others by the board? Director Hills?
Can I move on to another part of this report? Is that?
Yes.
Okay. So this is about on page 73, and I think it ties in with page 86. Let me just get back to page 73.
So are you moving on? You're moving off of the different topics, etc., right now, into metrics and reporting. Is that what you're looking at? Okay. So I'd like to bring up one other one before you go there.
Okay.
Another piece that doesn't necessarily show up in social procurement, the piece, but it's local. So how do we ensure that our local businesses get maybe even a competitive advantage inside of contracts being awarded? Because that has it has a social benefit, but it also supports the broader community. And I don't know how that gets reflected in there in a way that we can work within the various trade agreements. So that would be something else to be included. Okay. All right. Over to Director Hills.
Okay, so this is on the element 5, the ethical considerations, and it's the phrase "everyone involved in the procurement process," and then on page 86 it lists the exemptions. So I'm just trying to tie those two pieces. If there's an exemptions, are you exempted from the ethical considerations, or is anyone even buying through petty cash bound with the ethical considerations? So I'm just trying to, is there some exemptions from the ethics?
Staff?
Hi. Sorry, there's not really exemptions from the ethics part of it. The exemptions come in with awarding for like emergencies, only one supplier exists, technology restrictions because they own the copyright, things. That's where the exemptions come in play, but not really exemptions to the ethical standard.
So that would be more towards the limits, for example, or something like that. If there's only one, you're talking about sole sourcing sorts of things. Is that
Yes,
correct?
that's correct.
Okay. Director Hiltz?
So just to follow up, so everyone means every single person of the SCRD who spends money?
And staff?
Yes, it would apply to every person, every employee of the Sunshine Coast Regional District.
Okay. Any other? Director McMahon?
I just had a question. Are we able to include the experience of other customers as a criteria when we're reviewing a vendor? For instance, if the town of Gibsons had used a particular vendor and had a very unsatisfactory experience with them, or a wonderful experience with them, are we able somehow to incorporate that into our decision making?
And staff?
Hi. Yes, if they've used them as a reference, we definitely can go back. There is some wording, but it's very limited around that using information. So when you get a proposal, you can actually only evaluate what's in that proposal. So if it's there, if they use it as a reference, we can contact them. If it's not, it becomes more challenging. It's kind of like when an employee hires, right? You can't just go contact people that you know necessarily that works. It is still restricted. Does that answer your question?
Any other comments, questions, direction? Director Hiltz? Director Brand?
Do we periodically review standing contracts with suppliers? For instance, we've had the same legal services for years. Have we ever, reviewed that?
Staff?
Hi, yes. Oh, sorry.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, we do review them. Yeah.
Okay. Director Hiltz?
Thanks, Chair. It's a kind of a process piece about policies in general. So this is like a complete rewrite. So is this and how do policies develop? So is this an amendment to the policy, or will it be like a completely new policy, a new number? Just kind of trying to understand that.
Hi, it would be a completely new policy.
Any other comments, questions? Director Mann and Director Pratt.
I'm just saying this is great. I think long overdue, and I think this is wonderful.
I'm going to go back to Director Hiltz's suggestion of and make the motion that we become part of the Social Benefits Hub and.
Is that what it's called? Social?
Yeah, I think it's
Coastal Community Initiative.
Yeah, the Coastal Community Social
Initiative or whatever? Can we have staff find out what it's called and say,
yes,
we want to belong to that?
We want to belong to that.
Tina.
Yeah, staff would make the suggestion that when we bring back the policy in July, if that's actually when we want to consider the draft policy, that we then bring back what sort of the implications and what the process is, because I think I'm not sure where they're at in their process. It was a pilot project, and now it's evolved into something else. So we'll report back as to where they stand right now, and some more information as to what the role the SRD would play if they were part of that, and what resources would be required. So we'd bring that back, and then we can make a motion at that time.
Director Pratt?
Would you like that as a motion to provide direction, or is that staff have enough direction that way?
Before you speak on that, I know they presented at ABICC. Where they are now is they actually, when you provide funding, they actually provide you with guidance around how to do your procurement policy to incorporate it. So they've done a lot of the work already, which would actually benefit staff in putting together our bylaw and our draft. So we might want to move forward with that quicker than waiting for the bylaw to come back. So I think, depending on timing here, we might want to move it forward quicker. Yeah, staff?
Those resources are already made public. So we've already been attending webinars hosted by them. So we know of the information that they're providing. So
awesome.
So those are the things that have been contemplated and part of what's drafted here and part of the draft policy. So
thank you.
Yeah.
Director Tice.
Yeah, I kind of mentioned it sort of as part of the greenhouse gas before, but I just wanted to kind of highlight that I didn't really see too much wording in this draft here about lifetime costing of things that we procure. So I think that should be part of your the decision-making process is the lifetime cost of anything. So, and I think that's probably works hand in hand with the whole asset management piece, but I don't see it in here right now. So I just maybe.
Staff?
So if I'm just understanding what is being suggested is, I'm not sure that would fit within the procurement policy. It would probably fit within the decision-making of determining a service level. So procuring is really after the fact of the board deciding what service level or what goods you need to deliver a service. And so if you're purchasing a new vehicle, for instance, it's important to understand what the life cycle cost of procuring that particular item, because there may be ancillary things in addition to procuring an agreement. So if you're constructing a building, when you make the decision to construct a building, you want to know what the continued life cycle costs, and even, is it a LEED standard building that you're going to be constructing, those types of things. So all the facets. That's part of the business case, and when you're deciding on what you're going to be doing, procuring is really just a tool to execute that particular decision. So it wouldn't be in that particular one. I think it would more factor into, in your asset management, your life cycle costing, your business case, and deciding what you're going to be delivering and that service level decision. That would be my suggestion.
So what you're saying is it is part of the process, not necessarily part of the procurement piece.
There would be elements in the procurement piece, which would be, we already in our existing procurement policy or purchasing policy have to factor in some things for gas tax reporting back to the federal government. So there's already some environmental considerations, but if we want to heighten what those requirements would be, we can look at some options and present them as part of the policy. But again, how these all link will be really important, and we'll also suggest that there might be a decision when the policy is presented is depending on where your strategic plan is to make sure there's some alignment there.
Okay, so we'd be looking for a motion now that would read that staff incorporate the items discussed and come back in July with a draft policy. So moved? Seconded? Any other discussion? All in favor? Thank you. So Annex F on page 95. Thank you, Valerie. And Mr. Hall.
Thank you, Chair Seegers. Staff have been working with ARENA user groups on space allocation as described in staff reports in January and February of this year. Following board policy and administrative procedure, an August ice offering at the Gibsons and Area Community Centre was made, with ice to be provided if variable costs of ice, calculated as shown in the February staff report, are covered by user group rentals. Based on requested bookings received to date, a variable cost deficit of between $7,600 and $8,500 exists for August 2019. This deficit may be reduced if and when staff and user groups collaborate on additional recruitment of user group programming between now and August. Based on the small size of the deficit and recognizing that processes and lead times are in the process of improving, staff recommend proceeding with ICE in August 2019. Committee direction is sought as this recommendation is outside of administrative procedure. Thank you.
So I attended the ICE allocation meeting where this came up, and I just want to commend staff and the community for the quick response. So we passed this, end of February? And the first one was month of April, and they basically covered off in that time frame. So a month, they covered off the variable costs for April and have done, I think, a pretty good job of doing August as well, given the short lead time that we've given them this year. And as we indicated, certainty will make a big difference for this group. So I would totally be in favor of this recommendation as presented. And Director Ties.
My one question is the cost of putting in water and how that relates to the variable cost and the timing of putting in that water, considering that we might not have it from I believe GAC is in Zone 3 and would be Chapman water, and if we have to truck it in, that would probably increase the costs considerably of maybe putting it in August, but then September would probably be no different. So just some comments from staff on that.
Staff?
Thank you for the question, Chair. Staff are preparing a plan to install ice using water from outside of the Chapman system if water restrictions are in effect at that time. And once ice is installed, both SCRD arenas have high-efficiency closed-loop plant cooling systems that are capable of operating in water-restricted conditions. As for the costs associated with that extra step of sourcing water from outside of the Chapman system, staff don't have a figure for that because it hasn't been done before, but are appreciative of and sincerely grateful for the offers of support from both Town of Gibson's and from private individuals and organizations in the community to support ice and recreational opportunities, and would look to those opportunities as ways to reduce costs associated with that extra incremental step for bringing in water. The regional district does have some equipment available for use, like pumps and hoses and that type of equipment that can help with that process as well. Thanks.
And Director Beamish?
Yeah, that was going to be my comment as well, and that I don't know if you've been in contact with our staff about access to water, but certainly the Zone 1 and 2 water, I'd like to expect that would be available to you, so that. But I'd leave that for you to coordinate with our staff and see what they respond to.
Director Hills.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I'm totally in support of the resolution, and thanks staff for really. I think they've been incredibly responsive and in the offering. And so my kind of question is about as the service or as this offering matures, and that the recreation policy is that arenas respond to user group demand. So in terms of there's a gap, there's a room for improved or more use of this offering. So does the regional district go out and market this? Like, do we now have a competitive advantage in terms of having this ice surface in terms of areas, and who would actually try to fill that? Is it strictly the user groups, or like would Sunshine Coast Tourism say we have this thing and come here because we have this ice? Like, and how do we fill that gap? Like, that's why I'm wondering, is that a SCRD role, or who would do that?
And staff?
Thank you, Chair. So promotion of the opportunities that are available through SCRD facilities is work that is undertaken by staff. Certainly there's coordination and cooperation with user groups. And so, for example, for August, we understand that Gibson's and Area Community Centre may be the only ice that's available on the entire Sunshine Coast. And so, in partnership with user groups, staff are reaching out to our neighbours in Cathet to see if there are opportunities to bring visitors to the coast for this facility. And that type of blended relationship is ongoing, not just restricted to August ice. Thank you.
Any other questions, comments? Would someone like to make the recommendation as presented? Moved? Seconded? All those in favor? Thank you. Thank you, staff. So Annex G, This is with regard to the bursaries at the secondary schools coming up in June. And what staff are looking for is which director will be attending which graduation ceremony for the bursary presentation so that they can notify them and ensure that somebody's there. Director McMahon.
I just had a couple of questions about the bursaries. One is, how long have we awarded them? And the second one was, when did we last review the amount of the bursary?
Thank you. And staff?
So the regional district has been providing bursaries since 2006. At that original time, there were only 3 secondary schools that were being awarded, and it was $1,000 that they were granted. So when the alternative school was put on to the docket in 2009, it got reduced to $750, and that's the last time it was reviewed.
Director McMahon.
I would just like to observe that the amount of bursaries, or the average amount of that bursaries are, has not changed substantially since I went to high school, whereas the cost of tuition has skyrocketed in that time. So I would like to consider reviewing the amount that we are giving out, because $750 doesn't go very far these days.
Okay, and is that something that could be done for this year, or would that have to be in the budget for next year?
It would have to be for the budget for 2020. So we can, if the motion was made, we could bring that forward as part of the 2020 budget deliberations.
Director McMahon?
In that case, I'd like to move that we review the bursary amount for the 2020 budget.
And I'll second.
Did either of you have a ballpark amount, or would you like to see what happens and then inform staff later?
With someone with children in university right now, I can tell you how expensive it is. So I'm happy to have this as a discussion at the, I would say minimum 1,000, we can discuss it maybe further through pre-budget and see if we want to up it more then.
I know we reviewed ours a couple of years ago, I think, and did up it. I don't remember what it is now, but we did up it as well in the district.
Well,
staff?
Can provide some research and even look to other jurisdictions and bring some information as part of pre-budget.
Okay, so we have a motion on the floor that the bursary amount be looked at for the 2020 budget. And did you want us to, you'll do the research as part of that? Okay. All those in favor? Thank you. All right, so back to the question. We have the Sunshine Coast Alternative School, Elphinstone, Pender, and Chadlich. Who would like to go where? Director Lee, would you like to do Pender?
Actually, I believe Lori would like to do Pender this year.
Okay.
And as a lot of Half Moon Bay children do attend Pender, it's entirely appropriate.
Okay, so,
so
Director Pratt, Pender?
Yes. And yeah, and I'm happy to do any other ones. It's a having done this having been a school trustee for 10 years, I can tell you it's such an amazing time to be part of this celebration. So I encourage any of the rural directors to be there.
Okay, is there anyone who would like to attend the Sunshine Coast Alternative School and present bursary? Director Hills.
If no one is, I'm happy to be wherever. Yeah, I'm very, education's high priority, and scheduling I can fit in with Elphinstone or the alternative school, or I can be to support the chair in any of those two as well.
Okay, so if Director Hiltz with the alternative school?
And I'm happy to do Chadlich. I'm happy to do Elphinstone if none of the other rural directors want to, but I'm okay with it.
Director Hiltz?
I'm happy to accompany the chair. If there's more impact with the chair delivering, I'm happy to stand by and support. So there might be more impact with the chair. So,
Director McMahon?
I can't make Elphinstone anyway because that's my APC night. So.
Okay. Director Ties?
I could do Elphinstone.
Okay. So we've got secondary school, Elphinstone, Pender, and Chat then? Chadlich? Did you want, okay, Director Pratt then for Chadlich as well. Okay, you got that? Okay. So we have a motion that those directors as identified will attend the graduation ceremonies for the bursary presentations. All those in favor? Thank you very much. So Annex H on page 101, this is with regards to the request for proposal RFP 19376 contract award for wood waste processing. And I'll turn it over to staff.
Thank you, Chair Seegers. The SCRD collects wood waste at Seashell Landfill and Pender Harbor Transfer Station with the intent of diverting it from being landfilled. The wood waste is collected as one of two categories, clean and contaminated. Previously, a contractor was removing this material from the two facilities for processing off coast. The contract expired in January, and staff initiated a request for proposal for this waste stream. The RFP closed on March 8th, and 2 competent bids were received. The proposals were scored against the criteria set out in the RFP. Salish Environmental Group Inc. met the specifications as outlined in the RFP and are the best value to deal with this waste stream. Therefore, staff recommend that the wood waste processing contract be awarded to Salish Environmental Group Inc. Under this contract, the public will bring their wood waste to the contractor's facility in Seashell instead of the Seashell landfill. To allow for smooth transition, staff developed a communication plan and will work with the contractor on the development of the deadline implementation or the detailed implementation plan. There will be no change to the service delivery model for Pender Harbor Transfer Station. Staff also recommend that this wood waste processing contract award be forwarded to this afternoon's board meeting for adoption consideration. Staff would be pleased to answer any questions that the committee might have.
Thank you. Any questions from directors? Director Ties.
Yeah, the report here isn't 100% clear that there will continue to be user fees for tipping or tipping fees, I guess. I just want to see how those tipping fees are going to be and whether they're going to change as to current standards. Thank you.
And staff?
Thank you for your question. The tipping fees will remain the same, and basically there's 2 locations. At Pender Harbor, the tipping fees will be collected at the site. And at Seashell, the tipping fee will remain the same, but will be collected at Salish Soils facility.
Okay. I had a question, too. I wasn't clear in reading this if the site will take both the clean wood and the contaminated, so items of screws, paint, etc. They would both move over to Salish or not?
Thank you for your question. So at Salish, they would be taking both clean and contaminated wood. So all wood that's currently going to Seashell landfill would then go to their facility.
Thank you.
Again, at Pender Harbor, it would stay status quo.
Okay. Any other questions? Director Hiltz.
Yeah, I actually got a couple, but I guess I'm looking at the source. It is eye-opening to see how much wood waste comes in. That was the first thing that I was surprised. But so most of the source of the wood waste would it be from the construction and demolition aspect of the waste stream? That's the first question.
And staff?
Thank you for your question, and that is correct.
Thank you. And Director Hiltz?
Just a follow-up and a plug for, so the revitalizing of the Grantham's Hall was a good example of reusing things and not putting it into the landfill. So, and the other is, I'm interested in the definition of contaminated and non-contaminated, and can what happens with the contaminated, and it seems like it goes to the landfill, and can that contaminated be used as the cover rather than the uncontaminated? I'm just trying to understand that.
Thank you. And staff?
Thank you for your question, sir. There is the ultimate, it's up to the recycling market what is considered to be clean and contaminated, given that there must be an end use for anything that's considered clean. So the previous contract and this contract that's currently being considered, there are some differences there between what is considered clean and contaminated. And that's all in line with the more general trend in the recycling market at the moment, that less and less is considered clean and more is considered contaminated. So in this case, we will work with the contractor to ensure that as much as possible is considered clean and is being repurposed, reused. In terms of use, the contaminated part, chipped, will be used as cover material in the landfill. Thank you.
Any other questions? So we have a recommendation that the contract be awarded, that the delegated authorities be authorized to execute it, and that it be forwarded to the May 23rd board meeting. Moved and seconded. All those in favor? Thank you very much. And comment? Go ahead, Director Tai.
Yeah, just a quick comment. Thank you for staff for that, and I think this is a great new solution, and I think it's a very commendable solution that we've found here, especially because it sounds like our wood waste was actually going off coast and then being landfilled, which is horrible. Sounded horrible to me. So.
All right. So last item, item number 10, Annex I, and this is a letter from Mayor Mike Hurley from the City of Burnaby regarding expanding investment opportunities. And when we looked at this during our agenda review, we asked Tina to look at what would the implications of this would be. First of all, is it legal, and what are the implications of going forward with this? So I'll turn it over to Tina.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So in reading the correspondence from the City of Burnaby, I was able to do a little research, and it's really interesting what they've referenced within their correspondence, because there's a lot of examples where other larger municipalities are doing similar, but there are examples within British Columbia and where there's alternative revenue sources within a municipality. And potentially some regional districts as well. I haven't had a chance to really delve into the research, where there may be some alternative sources of revenue. So, for instance, in Penticton, they have a utility that offsets a majority of their funds or of their taxation, and that's a revenue stream. In the City of Surrey, for instance, and many other lower mainland municipalities, they actually have divisions and arms of their municipality that's for real estate investment. And City of Surrey, for instance, has been one of the most successful models. So I'm not quite sure what the purpose of changing these aspects of the community charter, because there may be other things within other local government that might meet their needs. I think there's more research that needs to be had in really what is the purpose of modifying. I would hope that the province would create some sort of task force, including the Municipal Finance Authority and some of those other jurisdictions that do have some models that do work, to give some feedback to this. So that's what we have, my comments right now.
Okay. So motion to receive the correspondence. Moved and seconded. All in favor of receipt? Thank you. And any questions for staff on this at this point? That covers it? Okay, perfect. So we're on to new business, and Director Beamish.
Thank you, Chair. It just occurs to me again, we're at the number of issues on the Sunshine Coast, water being primary among them, that we've focused our attention on in recent weeks, and will continue to focus our attention on as the season goes forward. But in parallel with that is our concern about the drought and the dryness in the forests. And hearing the issue now that's occurring again this year, this time in high level Alberta, and the fires and the need for evacuation. And I'm just wondering if we should initiate an awareness program at this time for our community. We have annually, I know we go through Emergency Preparedness Week, and we go through all sorts of different things, but the issues we have lots of good information. Prepare for your pets, a basic emergency kit, fire guide to landscaping, homeowner's manual, Fire Smart. We just need to kind of keep that awareness out there, and in parallel with the water issue, I believe it's equally important. And I think the first step is that people need to be prepared at home to look after themselves in the case of a fire emergency and any kind of emergency, but the awareness right now being one of fire, that we need to emphasize that people need to have their emergency kits ready, up to date, and available, and know what their evacuation plans are, know what their insurance covers. I mean, this is a time to talk to your insurance company and make sure you have adequate insurance. So, and I don't know how we can do this other than through our websites and other things that we are doing. I know that right now the town of Gibson's has got 4 radio spots a day where we're focusing on the Cape Town Water Challenge. I'm going to suggest that we move that ahead and we focus on preparedness, emergency preparedness for a period of time to create that awareness. But it's just one of those things that concerns me. And the other interesting thing is that a point of information for everybody is that I've been appointed to be the UBCM representative on the Urban Deer Advisory Committee. And I'm going to advise those urban deer on how to look after themselves in a fire and what their escape routes are. So I'll be performing my function. So just be aware of that the urban deer will be well advised. We don't have a wildlife brochure here yet, but I'll make sure we get one. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Along those same lines, the Community Forest is doing an urban interface workshop on June 10th, which will be open to the public. Afternoon, they'll be working with the fire departments, actually up and down the coast. They're bringing in 4 experts who've presented elsewhere. And in the evening, it's open to the public. So, and they will be advertising that ahead of time as well.
The town of Gibson's also has funding for some interface fire work, so we'll be doing that too.
All right. Director Ties.
Yeah, I've just been wondering, and I know that Gibson's has a grant for looking into wildfire interface and things like that. And this year we didn't get that grant. But I'm also just wondering if there's might be a way of us preempting those studies and just saying, anything above the highway needs to be built to national wildfire safety standards, that kind of thing, so that, or any new buildings, that kind of, so that I'm just thinking this is probably going to come down the pipeline. Do we need a grant to and extensive amounts of study to come to the same conclusion that we're kind of logically thinking right now? So that's kind of my question at this point in time.
Director Hills.
I'm going to follow up with Director Beamish in terms of we do have a significant public outreach coming up with the water dialogues, and just maybe as the promotional materials at a table that we can present have some of this fire smart aspect. I don't want to detract from the water, but there is anxiety out in the community, and it's a chance to provide some information. So as just an information providing at the water dialogues, perhaps?
I think staff made a note. They'll have some documentation there. Director McMahon.
Yep, the Gibson's Fire Department has set up a fire extinguisher demo for the Elphinstone Community Association next month, and that will be an opportunity to bring some fire education material along. So they working with the fire departments and the community associations would be an avenue.
Sounds good. Any other comments? Director Pratt.
Well, based on how many fires we've already had this year, is significant, and including a family losing their home. I think it's pardon me? Have we? Oh, that's right. Yes, we did. We lost a life as well already. Holy cow. I'm happy to hear that Director Beamish is dealing with the deer because if you had a chance of dealing with deer and fire prevention and anything, Gibson's is the place because you probably have the most civically minded deer, yes, the ones that use the crosswalks. So I'm definitely in support of if anywhere we can promote the fire safety and maybe looking at other options too.
Okay, I think we've exhausted that topic for now. So I look for a motion to go in camera under section 91I and K of the Community Charter, and a 5-minute break following that. So somebody move that. Moved and seconded. All in favor? Thank you. And any questions? Connie? Can you speak to that, Leonard? Okay. I think that's part of what we're looking at is like where the funds come from. I know that there was a legacy at one point. Some funds were given to them, and part of what we're looking at is how long will they last? What are they covering? What happens if they run out? Those are all questions, I think. Tina?
As part of the regional district's budget deliberations, the reading room did submit a their reading room budget. So I think it's a little detailed. So you could probably look at our round 1 budget, and you'll probably find it in there, and how they source their funding. So
Perfect.
There's a couple of sources.
Okay, Connie? Tina?
Yes, we do. It's called the Ranger Station, and so the reading room is one of the tenants.
Thank you. And Sophie, any questions? Thank you. And John, any questions? Thank you. All right, we're going to take a 5-minute break.